So we've got 77. I think we're expecting a couple of more, but we will get started with the reason that we're all here tonight, and that is to taste the 2020s. It's been a interesting year to say the least, but something that didn't change was what's happening in the vineyard, because the vines don't really care if there's a pandemic going on or anything like that. So we had to make wine no matter what. And we're here to taste the in progress, kind of a halfway checkpoint of the wines. So joining me today is our owner and president, Ed Madronich. He's down in the bottom right corner of my screen if you want to give a quick wave. He is. We have our head winemaker, Dave Sheppard, who just completed in 2020 his 40th vintage as a winemaker. So big milestone there. Congrats, Dave. And then we have our assistant winemaker, Allison Findlay, who is, I think, entering your 5th season now at Flat Rock Cellars, right?
Entering my
6th season, just completed.
Just completed my 5th.
I've got a couple of comments from people just right now saying I'm the only one that's visible. If you go to the top right corner of your screen where it says view in the grid, you can hit speaker view or gallery view. Speaker view will put the person who is like who's speaking as the main picture, but if you go gallery view, you should be able to see everybody. I want to, before we get started, I'll pass it off to Ed just to welcome everyone and give it a few thoughts.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Super excited about this. You know, it's one of the things that I think I pride what we do at Flat Rock Cellars is we're not afraid to show our stuff behind the scenes where everything's not perfect and finished and everything like that. And I think that's a testament to the confidence that the winemaking team has in the wines that they make. I think it's often really hard to sort of get some insights into the wines before they're finished. You know, the winemakers typically want to hold them until they're finished and in bottle. And I think one of the great things about wine is that experience and that learning. You know, what do wines taste like in the middle of winter when they're not going to be bottled for another 8 months or something like that? And how do you know what it's going to taste like? What are the decisions? What are the things that are happening in the winery? What are the stresses maybe that Dave and Allison have at this time of year, worrying about where that wine's going to be? And, you know, this to me is really an example of what we love to do at Flat Rock Cellars, is to share everything that we do. We are crazy passionate about our wine. And, you know, whenever we talk about what we do at Flat Rock Cellars, it's not make wine, it's not sell wine, it's really to share our passion for wine. So being able to share with you wines that aren't finished, that might be a long way from being finished, is sometimes nerve-wracking, but it is part of a learning process, and we love sharing that learning with our customers. So glad that you're with us tonight. Look forward to opening the curtains to what's behind the scenes at Flat Rock right now in the winery from the 2020 vintage. And be kind if something didn't travel well to your place, because I know the wines, when tasted out of tank and barrel, are absolutely amazing wines out of the 20 vintage. So really looking forward to it and seeing what happens tonight. So enjoy and ask lots of questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Ed. I know that we're still trying to figure out, I'm seeing in the chat over here, we're still trying to figure out the screen, but I'm the host again, so we should all be able to see it. Just wanted to point out that we will be using the chat. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask there, or at the bottom, there's a Q&A section. So feel free to post your questions there, and we'll do our best to get to them all. If we don't get to them during the seminar, we'll definitely hang around afterwards a little bit, because I know this is a super fun topic and we've already had lots of inquiries before and already during. So without further ado, the most important part is, if you haven't already, go ahead and pour some wines for yourselves. They were numbered 1 through 6, but we have gone ahead and tweaked the order for you guys a little bit. So if you're keeping them in track in front of you, you want to have them in the order 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 4. and we will get to that, the reasoning behind that, a little bit further on.
So Jacob, there's a quick question. If you only have one glass or you only have 3 glasses, someone said they have 3 glasses, that's fine. We're going to do the wines in order. So you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 4, as Jacob just described. We're going to just bump 4 to the end. But yeah, by all means, if you don't have 6 glasses, that's okay. We are going to go through them one at a time. And I will say, if you have specific questions, put them in the Q&A, because then we don't lose the questions. If it's in the chat, there's a lot in the chat, we might lose something. So I see a few things that are there that we might lose if it's in the chat.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you. We'll be tasting them in pairs. We'll kind of work through the tasting in wines 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, then 5 and 6. But definitely, if you're feeling like it, don't wait for us. Go ahead, have a taste, and come back to the wines when we get to it. So to get started, Ed, 2020, how was it for you, both in the vineyard and personally? Just give us a little synopsis. Remind everybody what's going on.
Oh, well, 2020, I think everybody knows what it was like. It was interesting for us. I think, we were here in Ontario, we were deemed an essential service. So that made it interesting that, obviously we weren't shut down in the same way I think others. I also think we found new ways to do business, a lot of direct to consumer, particularly March, April, May, when we went into that first lockdown. A lot of people were ordering it online, ordering it from home, which I think was great. So changed the way we did business. But quite frankly, for Dave and Allison, probably didn't change a heck of a lot. They had to make wine, and they had to go through all of that. I'll say one of the hopeful things that I think out of 2020 is that notion of local. And I've always said I don't want people buying our wine because we're local. I'm confident that the wines we make are as good as anywhere in the world and deliver value better than anywhere in the world. And I believe that to my core. But a lot of Ontarians don't necessarily buy local wines. There's whatever, for whatever reason. But I hope they, I think one of the things we realize is we're intertwined. And one of the things that I'm super proud of is I remember back in March, I had a few staff members come to me, Ed, am I going to have a job? And, I sort of hadn't dawned on me that that's how some of the people on our team were. And I literally said right away, I said, look, everybody here, we're going to keep all our full-time staff no matter what. And we were able to do that through all of this. And that, I think as a team, that wasn't just me, that was a team making that commitment to one another. So really, really proud of that. And those were some of the realities that we had to deal with. So it was just a really interesting year. And I'm sure it was challenging for everybody that's out there. But at the end of the day, if we look at the wine and Mother Nature, in spite of the pandemic that Mother Nature gave us, she certainly gave us some good sunshine and some good weather to make some great wines.
Dave, do you want to elaborate on that a little? How was the growing season for us in 2020?
Yeah, I'll try and give it to you in a nutshell, but basically, we had a very late start this year, which is really not a bad thing in our part of the world. Typically what happens if you have a really early start and the vines kind of wake up and get going, then they're at risk of a late spring frost. So a late start is not a bad thing because we typically get the weather we need to catch up. And that's exactly what happened this year. So quite cool and wet in the early going, like March, April, May were not that nice. When summer finally kicked in, it was the perfect summer. It was enough sunshine, it was warm, it was dry. It was not too dry, it was not too warm. We didn't have those, 2 weeks of 33-degree days. We had things right in the proper zone. Daytime highs and nighttime lows were like picture perfect. It was textbook perfect. So the fear going through the summer was, if it's this good now, what's going to happen in the fall? And as luck would have it, it carried on right through our harvest. Fortunately for us, we focus on the varieties that are among the earlier ripening varieties, which work to our favor. Riesling would be the last one for us typically, and that still fell within the beautiful weather that we had. So all in all, it was the wine god smiled on us this year. And when summer came, it was beautiful.
Excellent. And then Allison, you're generally, you take charge of the harvest and your team. How was that during COVID, and what were the challenges, and how did you kind of get around that to take what was as Dave said, a really, really great growing season, and make sure that we did all the little things right to get to this point where we have the wine in front of us now?
Yeah, like Dave said, going into harvest, we were terrified that the skies were going to open up and, locusts were going to come down on us because it was such a great growing season. And then harvest happened and it got better, and the days were still warm and the nights were so cold that we could, like, that fruit was like in our refrigerator. It was like keeping it perfect at that perfect ripeness and just keeping it clean and fresh. And we literally picked on our schedule versus Mother Nature's, which has not happened in my decade of being in this industry. I don't know about Dave's 4 decades, but that doesn't happen. So harvest from a grape standpoint was just great. The management of COVID protocol during harvest was a whole other can of worms that was great learning experience for myself. And I was just kind of masks, wash hands, like running around, distance, don't touch that, like just really trying to manage people and just their placement. Luckily, we have a gorgeous, giant 6-level facility where a lot of the time people are pretty spread out in their work that they're doing. So those who did work together, if someone had to be in close contact with someone else, there was always masks, there was gloves, there was protocols in place. And my team was fantastic. I had kind of a mismatch of wine enthusiasts and just like people in the restaurant industry who lost their jobs due to COVID come onto the production side. And man, it was so cool to see just a dynamic group, and everyone got along great. They're all very musically inclined. We couldn't do a harvest concert, which we wanted to, but yeah, they're just excellent people and really adhered to the rules that made my life a lot semi-easier, not a lot easier, just a little easier.
I don't think there's a such thing as an easier harvest, but even without COVID, but that's great. All right, time to taste. That's enough jibber jabber. If you guys haven't already, grab your two Pinot Noirs. And Allison, if you want to just tell us the difference, where they're from, a couple of details about them, and everyone can go ahead and taste alongside.
While everybody's tasting, I want to, one of the things Allison didn't really mention was, her leadership for the harvest team. She does a great job getting the right people in, and they're there for only 6-8 weeks, but they got to work super hard. It's a tough job. It's wet and dirty and muddy and sticky and gooey and all of those things. And you have to do it safely, and you have to wear harnesses, and you have to do all of this stuff. And to motivate and drive a team to actually make the quality of the wines that we demand is an amazing feat unto itself. And Allison definitely leads that. Dave's there to obviously support, but it's an amazing job as the team comes together. So I want to thank the team for doing all that hard work. It's absolutely amazing.
Perfect. All right, Allison, what are the 2 Pinots that we're tasting?
So the 2 today, you have in your number 1 glass, that's going to be your Manitoba Pinot. So not only do I, run a tight ship of a crew during harvest, I also take creative, and I run with it and I name all the blocks. We keep everything separate. We have 14 separate blocks of Pinot. We ferment separately, keep separately through oak. This is the Manitoba block because it's in the Midwest of our vineyard. And that's how I got the name. I wanted to name it Oklahoma, and Dave's like, no, it's got to be Canadian. I'm like, of course it's got to be. So this is the Manitoba block was born. It's clone 667, a beautiful clone that we have planted in our vineyard. And it's very just fruit driven, very, good ripening in Niagara every single year. And we pulled it from a 2-year-old oak barrel, means it's been filled twice. just to really showcase the fruit and the wine and not the oak profile. And then wine number 2, that's going to be from our winery block. So it's actually from the farthest picked Pinot Noir on the east side of our property on 17th Street there when you drive up to the winery. And that also came from the same age of barrel and the same cooper, to try to keep those 2 things consistent so we can really showcase the difference of clone and block and pick date in these wines.
Ed, what do you think? How are the
I'm going to talk about the Canoe barrels. Am I not, Dave?
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
So just so everybody knows, and it's a little bit of a running joke here, is I love Canoe barrels. And every time I'll say a new winemaker comes in, Dave's been with us for, I guess, 5 vintages now. But even previous winemakers, and they figure out he'll never pick it. When we do our tasting, our blending session in July, it's always done blind. And invariably, Ed will never figure out which, because you taste in 50 barrels in a morning, and Ed will never figure out which ones are which ones are the Canoe barrels. And invariably, I know exactly what Canoe tastes like, because it is by far, for me, my favorite tasting barrel. So I don't know if they picked it because they know I like Canoe barrels for today's tasting, but absolutely, when we think about, we have and I'll let Dave talk to our oak regimen, but I'm going to laugh because they picked a Canoe barrel, and I love Canoe. So I'm biased to these wines already.
How I mean, it's your winery, Ed. You've tasted the Pinots for 20 plus years now. How do the 2020s kind of jump out of the glass to you?
Yeah, everybody wants to, we were talking just before we started just about how, a great vintage 2020, and absolutely it was. And I think the wines are delicious and have amazing intensity and amazing complexity, which I love. But I'm going to speak sort of in the context of overall. And the way I like to describe it is, it's hard to sort of look back and say, this is better than other vintages, because this vintage got the benefit of another year of vine age, right? And as the vines get older, I'll argue they get better, more complex. We had also got an extra year of us knowing our vineyard better, knowing our winemaking better. So we've been making wine. 2003 was the first vintage, right? Young vines, didn't know a lot about our vineyard, didn't know really anything about our vineyard. And as we've gone on, we get smarter and smarter and better and more capable, and use better and better techniques. So yes, great vintage. Mother Nature was great to us. Yes, they jump out of the glass, super proud of the quality and stuff. But I don't want to say better. I just say we always get better and better. And I might come back to that later and talk a little bit more about it. But absolutely super happy with what we've got there.
Dave, how do you feel about the 2020s? You've been making Pinot for a couple of years.
I'm loving them. I'm a big fan of all wines. Obviously, I like making all wines. I like drinking all different varieties. But I do have a soft spot for Pinot. But Pinot is one of those unforgiving grapes. When it's not a great Pinot year, it's really not a great Pinot year, and it poses a lot of serious challenges. But when it is great, then it's just so dynamic, and there's so much going on in Pinots. They're so expressive, and they get me all fired up and excited. And 2020 is one of those years that it's definitely a Pinot year, and it's got me excited.
So when I first poured these, something jumped, and any of you guys can take this, something jumped out of stood out to me, and that's the color. And that can actually answer a handful of the questions that are popping up in the chat box here. One was, why do we use harnesses? And I know that has something to do with the extraction of color. So why do these seem so dark comparatively when we think of Pinot as a lighter colored wine?
It's the vintage. It was the season that we had, the conditions that we had played the biggest part in that. Pinot Noir as a variety, the coloring matter in grapes are called anthocyanins, and there are fewer anthocyanins in Pinot Noir than other varieties. Like just as an example, I think there's six in Pinot Noir that have been, isolated. Something like Merlot has 11, Cab Sauv has 13. So if we get every, microgram of color out of the Pinot Noir, it's still not going to be as much as something like a Merlot or a Cab. But in a year like this, where we had those beautiful warm days, not too hot, because when it gets too hot, vines kind of shut down and try to protect themselves. We didn't have that this year. We had the situation where we had beautiful color development by day and color preservation by night. So those cool nights are just as important as the warm days were. So everything kind of aligned for very good color development. Slightly smaller crop, which also played into it, because you've got smaller individual sized berries. So the ratio of juice to skins is a little more concentrated. All that stuff kind of factors into the color. I would say these are atypically dark for that variety. Not so for a Cab Sauv or Merlot or something like that. But for Pinot, obviously we got everything out of them, that because we always strive to get every last bit out. And I think we did, but there was more there to get out this year.
I'm just a couple things, Jacob, for me is when Dave says they were excited, I mean, Allison still laughs, smiles, giggles, jumps all around at the wines we made this year. And this is Dave super excited, everybody, by the way, right? He is the calmest, I'll say shit can be hitting the fan, and
I almost said that too, Ed.
And Dave is just calm. So when you see Dave excited like this, he's excited. And Allison, on the other hand, is bouncing off the walls at the winery every day, and it hasn't stopped since harvest. So that's excitement. So that's for sure. And that's in particular with the Pinots, obviously. And then Robin had a question, and I'm like, oh, Robin.
I was gonna set you up for that one.
No, you don't have to set me up. I saw the question, Robin. It's always reds before whites, and it's one of the things we do at Flat Rock Cellars. It is one of the great myths of wine. We are tasting in a specific order, and how I want you to do it is taste one of the reds, taste number 4, which is now in the 6th position, but the number 4 wine that is labeled number 4, and then taste the red and see what happens. So if you go taste the Pinot, taste number 4, which I said is now number 6, but number 4 from the bottle, and then taste the Pinot again, see what happens to the Pinot. I'm sure a few of you out there, when you come to Flat Rock, we want you to try what happens when you have the red, the white, and the red. It's why we always try Pinots before our white wines. Hopefully, Robin, you have a comment after you do that, if you have a chance to do that. And it really is, when you're doing a flighted tasting like this, you always want to start with reds, move to the white. I'm going to give you why, because hopefully Robin will try it, and I don't want to give it away. But give it a try. And everybody else who's on there, if you haven't heard reds before whites, try, like I said, either of the Pinots. The number 4 wine is now number 6, the number 4, and then try the Pinot again and see what happens to the Pinot. Hopefully you've all done that. You will find that the red tastes, I'll say, not really good after you try that white wine. And there's a reason why. You should always drink dry to sweet, right? Red wines in general are always drier than white wines. And even if they have the same amount of residual sugar, so you have the Pinot, and if you did a Chardonnay, Pinot has tannins in it, gives the feeling of dryness in your mouth. So even the difference won't be as noticeable as what I just gave you, but it will be still different. So you should always drink your reds to white. Yes, I see Martin, red to white is very Burgundian. And so you drink your Pinots and then your Chards in Burgundy. Absolutely. I have no idea why the rest of the world doesn't do it. It is just the best way to do it. And it makes, just a quick story is I had a couple of women come in. They said, we got to try your whites. I said, no, we start reds here. No, we do whites first. I said, where did you come from? Just came from Angels Gates. And I said, oh, you went through the whites. You ended with their off-dry Riesling. Yep. And then you tasted the first 3 reds. You didn't like them? No, we didn't like them. You liked the 4th one. I said, yeah, how'd you know? I did this tasting with them, red, white, red. And they're like, oh my God, we may have liked those first 3 reds, but we just tasted the wines in the wrong order. So when you taste the sweet wine and you go to a dry wine, it makes that dry wine tastes drier, bitter, loses all the fruit characteristics. So hopefully you saw that, and it answers that question, because it is a massive myth when it comes to wine.
And rant.
And rant, yes, sorry.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. It answers the question. All right, so we've gone through the Pinots. I'm going to throw up a quick poll because they are pretty different in style, even though they're from the same year, same vineyard. And I'd love to know which one people preferred. And while everyone's voting on that, it should be live on your screen now. Dave, I wondered if you could tell us what's next for these, like which one. I know there was a question, the difference between Pinot and Gravity. Where are these wines going?
All right. Well, most of the wines, the Pinot Noirs, they're all in barrel right now. They've been down there for a while. They have been going through the secondary fermentation, which is not truly a fermentation in scientific terms, but it's referred to as that, which is the malolactic fermentation, in which the malic acid, the natural malic acid found in the wine and the grapes, is being converted into a softer acid, which is lactic acid. And that process, natural process, takes a bit of time and needs some decent ambient temperatures. And that has the overall effect of reducing the acidity in general, which softens the wine out. So the wines have been slowly going through that, and slow is a good thing, slow and steady. They're all finishing up in the last few weeks, which is good, because sometimes they'll wait till the spring till it warms up again. So once all that process is done, then they're kind of resting in barrels, and then they've probably already started to integrate all the tannins, the natural wine tannins from the grape skins, with some of the oak tannins from the barrel. You get a lot of polymerization going on there. And what happens is the wine, all these elements that are floating around in there kind of come together and integrate and become one. And that's the process we're at now. So now it's a matter of waiting, having a bit of patience.
Do we think it's more Pinot, more Gravity for these wines?
I would say this year is more of a Gravity year, just by the taste profile that most of them have so far. It's that depth of flavor and complexity they have this year, which is more sort of our Gravity style.
Perfect. Yeah, so, and just in case people aren't aware, our Pinot Noir, our estate Pinot Noir, is always available in the LCBO and grocery stores, and you can order it from the winery, you can find it everywhere. Gravity is really the top selection of our estate vineyard. And if you're looking for it, because I had some questions before this, it's been sold out for a couple of months now. We went through 2 vintages in 6 months, and the 19 won't be released until the fall. But it is what it is. The wines are amazing, so we have to wait for them. And then I know that Dave had actually earmarked this last one for something special, the Pinot number 2, which actually was, it won the poll. It was 52% of the votes voted for number 2. That goes into a micro cuvee that we're going to be bottling this year. It'll be in magnums only, 25 cases, so about 156 packs. Sorry, 150 bottles, 25 6-packs. And it's an extension of the Ultra series that we did, where we're pushing boundaries. It's bigger, it's bolder, it's tannic. It's going to age for well, we'll see, but decades. And it's going into bottle in March. So it's coming up soon. And because it's not actually in bottle yet, we're selling it as a futures program. So if anyone has ever bought Bordeaux or Burgundy through futures, you know that you kind of purchase the wine before it's ready, and you typically get it at a lower price. So the Chardonnay that we have is $120 a bottle, and when we sell it in the shop, if there's any left, it'll be $140. And the Pinot you can actually buy right now for $140, And when it ends up in the shop, it'll be at 160. So you can save a little bit of money by buying it as a future.
And those are magnums we've never done magnums, and we're super excited about it.
It's our first one ever. And my God, when you hold them,
nicely.
It's beautiful. It's stunning. But yeah, you guys you can find that online. It'll be available for another week or so at the futures price. Like I said, the gravity as far as our Pinot Noir goes is gone until the fall, and you can always find our Pinot at your local LCBO.
I think Jacob keeps saying that the gravity sold out so quickly because it sold out just after we promoted him to our business development manager. So he's taking all the credit for the sales. So way to go, Jacob. Yes, you blew through the couple vintages when you started.
Well, it's only because the winemakers made 95-point wine.
It's all good. Right. I'm just joking.
That's enough of the Pinot. So now we're going to switch into the unoaked Chardonnay and our twisted. So wines number 3 and number 5 in the jars. Moving into our drier whites, because as Ed said, we'll do our reds, then our dry whites, and then into the sweeter whites. So everyone, kind of dig into those as we are talking about them. But Allison, I had a couple of questions in the chat. Why did we only see the unoaked and no oak Chardonnay? What's going on with the shards?
So the shards are, so we have a lot of different shards in the building right now. So we have our unoaked, we have our Chardonnay that's meant for our sparkling program, the riddles, and then we also have chard that's oak aged. And the ones that are oak aged right now have gone through primary fermentation in those barrels, but they're going through a malolactic fermentation, which Dave explained earlier, which is a conversion of a harsher acid to a softer acid to really build body and mouthfeel. So they're just not ready. They're shy. They're in a weird space. They're the teenage years right now, and they just don't want to come out of their room. They're listening to their they're heavy metal, and they're ignoring their parents. So the shards that are in barrels are not being showcased tonight, but we are showing our lovely, lovely unoaked shard, which I've loved making and I've loved drinking since I started at Flat Rock, because it's such a nice expression of beautiful fruit from Ontario that people aren't in love with Chardonnay or don't drink Chardonnay, but unoaked Chardonnay is such a great gateway. It's such a way to show people how beautiful it can be on its own, and I love it. So that's why this one is our unoaked, and that's why we're showing it tonight. And I just want to mention that some people mentioned there's spritz in some of the bottles. These are not finished wines. They are full of dissolved CO2, which is a natural byproduct of fermentation. So they are fresh and they're alive still. You are drinking a beautiful, alive, changing product.
From our point of view, that's a good thing, because that little bit of spritz in there is like nature's preservative. That's keeping them in good order. So when we see that, that makes us happy.
Hey, Jacob, I'm just going to fire through a bunch of questions that are up there so we don't miss out people on questions. Are we bottling the Pinots as single vineyard? We typically don't. There might be some new stuff coming out that Jacob is working on. I know there'll probably be some news, probably fall, that you'll see some stuff. Every year we do different things, different experiments. Like we did Nature Nurture in the past recently, where we did Pinot fermented with cultured yeast versus natural yeast that's in the air. So you may see it, but not necessarily. Will the Pinots be bottled separately or blended? We sit down in July, taste through all of the bottles and decide where they go. Do they go into gravity? Do they go into our estate Pinot, or do we do Nature Nurture series or a block series or a clone series, which we've done in the past? Question around beer from Mark. I don't know beer. I haven't figured out beer as well. I know they go lighter to darker, and I'm not convinced that's the best way to do it yet. So Mark, when I do a little bit more learning and homework, I'll be able to answer that question, but I know red to white with wine for sure. How do they compare to the ones from the barrel tasting last May? John, I would sit there and say totally different vintages, and Mother Nature is the difference, is what I would say. Our techniques and the things we do are the same, but Mother Nature is the one that determines how they're going to taste from one year to the next. Gravity come from a specific vineyard. Well, it's all from the Flat Rock vineyard. It's just that we break that vineyard up into a whole bunch of little pieces. Everything that we're tasting is single vineyard. It's all Flat Rock cellars. But when we break it up, it comes from different specific blocks, different elevations, different soil types, different slopes, different parts of the vineyard that we all put together. So it's all arguably single vineyard. It might just not be labeled that way. And yes, gravity refers to our gravity-fed process, so we don't have to pump the wine. So attach a hose to the bottom of the tank, let Mother Nature do its thing, and we can gravity feed it down into barrels, so we don't have to pump the wine. How big is a Magnum? It's 2 bottles of wine, 1.5 liters, so that one's good. And what is a wine clone? As I race through all of these so we can get back to wine, basically a wine clone, it's not genetically modified. What happened back, it started in the 50s, and in Burgundy, they would look at they'd be walking through the vineyard and they'd see this gnarly, you could see the vine had changed. So it had mutated, just like I guess the COVID virus is mutating now. And the vine mutated in the vineyard, and they have to actually take that mutated vine, propagate it, figure out if it makes wine, and then commercially build those things. So the clones that we have, they're called Dijon clones, obviously Dijon Burgundy, 115, 667. There's literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but really there's 6 or 7 clones that are used globally. So of the 1,000 clones that they've identified, there's probably about 6 that are used commercially for wine. 115, 667, 777 are the ones that we use. And it takes somewhere around 30 years to be able to identify, find something in the vineyard and propagate it commercially, because you have to find it in the vineyard, grow it, make wine, and then commercially make it. So they identified these in the 60s, and the first Dijon clones started coming out in the 90s. That would have been the 115, 113, 114, 115 were sort of the first, then 667, then 777. I think there's 828, and there's a 9 something that's out now. So over time, you'll see more and different clones, but they're not genetically modified. It's just mutated vines that happen naturally. Hopefully that answers your question quickly.
Yeah, and they'll all give different flavors, and they have different water retaining characteristics. So you'll use different clones in different regions, or even within different parts of the vineyard, to optimize their production. But Dave, you were talking about how the growing season was hot, and we were waiting for something to happen, and it didn't. But how will the 2020 kind of unplugged and the Chardonnays be different than other years? Will they be sweet, dry, acidic, not acidic? Like, what's the characteristic that we'll get out of the 2020s?
I think an interesting thing from 2020 was that with those cool nights that we had, all varieties were able to preserve their natural acidity. And that natural acidity is what gives them longevity as well. It keeps them fresh, it keeps them lively on the palate, but it also helps them live longer. I think in years that were hotter than this year, that acidity kind of falls out the bottom, and the wines are a little bit more short-lived. So I'm quite happy, because typically, what's considered a good year is not always a good year for all varieties, because they like different conditions. But this year it was more consistently good for more varieties because of that acidity retention. So I think what you're going to find from all the wines in 2020 is a little bit more freshness on the palate, and probably I really do think they're going to live longer.
They're super, it's really aromatic, like really bright, which is great. Ed, when the winemakers bring you unplugged from any vintage, what are you looking for in your unplugged?
I think purity and liveliness is really what we want to do, right? Like it to me, we call it unplugged because it's sort of the non-electric version. It's the not oaked, not tampered with. It's just meant to be really straightforward, and bright and lively to me is what unplugged should be. And and one of the things I love about our unplugged, even at whatever it is, $17.95, it can age. If we pull out one of these unplugged, because it's got this beautiful acidity and this freshness that ages and gains this really delicious aged Chardonnay characteristic over time. And you would never think of it as a 1795 wine. But if we went back to a 2007 or 2008 Unplugged, they're drinking unbelievable right now. It's just delicious. And you think a 13, 14-year-old unoaked Chardonnay wouldn't be able to last that long, but they're special for sure.
Yeah, I think we sent our wine club members 2011 or 2013 within the last year, and obviously we tasted before we sent it out. And at 7, 8, 9 years old, it's still fresh, still lively, and incredible.
Yeah.
All right, on to the fourth one. Yep. Yeah.
Sorry, just a quick note because it seems appropriate. Because this is a tasting of unfinished wines, it's important for the guests who are tasting with us to realize that they are tasting for the future. Like Allison and Ed, and we're all used to this. So when we taste things like acidity for this time of year, in the middle of January with an unoaked Chardonnay, we actually want it to be slightly more acidic now than we want it to be in the bottle. So we're kind of projecting forward because we know we're going to lose a little bit of that by the time it's in the bottle. So to a normal finished wine buyer's palate, it might be a little bit aggressive now, all of these wines, because we're excited because we're tasting for June, July, August, and so on, knowing where they're going. So it's kind of interesting, I think, if you're not used to tasting those young wines, to know that they are going to be a little bit fresher and more acidic now than when they're all done in the bottle.
Yeah, especially with the Pinots, like the non-aromatics, those aren't going to hit them. Like we won't be able to give those to you until, September of August of next year. That's when they'll go into bottle, and then they'll sit for another 6 months. So thanks for pointing that out, Dave.
And Allison, just while Dave was talking about that, I know you're the one that's doing all the hard work to make sure you're keeping on top of these wines right now. So what are the things that you're doing because they're just sitting in barrel? Oh my God, why am I paying you to do work? Because they're just sitting in barrel. There's nothing going on, right? So what are you doing to ensure that those wines are as great as they're going to be? Because remember, I always say making a great bottle of wine isn't about doing one thing. It's about doing a whole bunch of little things along the way. And it sounds like you're not doing anything right now. So I know that's not the case. So maybe you let everybody know, what are you doing right now to make sure these wines are awesome?
So yeah, everyone always says after harvest, you just, take the rest of the year off. And I laugh and go, actually, I just created 10 months of work for myself in 2 months. So I can not take any time off because these wines now were a grape, and I have to get them to a filtered, stunning, amazing quality product to a customer. So, there's a lot of steps that go in there. And like Ed said, quality is the most important thing. And the more labor intensive you are, the less interventionist you have to be, if that makes sense. So the more Dave and I care about these wines, the more we watch them and monitor them and really babysit them through the process, the less work we really have to do at an intervention standpoint. So right now we're tasting them, we're topping up the barrels because of evaporation, because we ferment or age them in wood. So it's porous. So we lose a little bit of wine every month. So Angel's share. And I have to top those barrels, make sure they're not on headspace, not getting oxidized. We are tasting, we're blending, we're planning for the future. And so there's a lot that's going in behind the scenes right now. And like Ed said, we haven't stopped working because the wine does not care that it's a pandemic. So every single day we're in there just making sure that what ends up in your glass is absolutely perfect.
You notice she said tasting twice in there.
All right, Allison, you want to keep rolling and tell us about the next wine, which is Twisted. And so it's jar number 5 for everyone. This is one of the ones that we had to juggle around, but it's jar number 5. Tell us about Twisted. Tell us about the blend and the process.
Yeah, so Twisted is such a fun wine, not only to make but to drink as well. It is the perfect blend of Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Chardonnay. I've loved it since I started, and it's so fresh, and it's just so fun to always taste and see what the vintage is going to give you. So like I said, this blend is Riesling dominant, and then in the 2020 year in your glass, you're going to have, real geeky here, it's about 68% Riesling, 24% Gewürztraminer, and just a touch of Chard just at the end there, whatever my mental math is. And what we're looking for here is just a really balanced wine. We are looking for that Riesling structural backbone. We're looking for that beautiful aromatics of the Gewürztraminer, which I saw someone commenting, clove, there's floralness, there's peach, there's lychee. And then that Chardonnay is just there to really round out the flavors, really support the other characters in this show.
And I can kind of tie in a couple of questions to this. John asked, have the wines been blended yet? So the Twisteds have been blended, and the Pinots will still be single barrels at this point to be tasted and blended further down the line, probably in what, in the summer, June or so.
Yeah, a little bit later than that. We taste in July the Pinots.
Yep, there you go. Ed or Dave, any comments on the Twisted?
Yeah, I actually love this blend. It's like Ali said, it's a fun wine to make because you can really craft a wine like this because we're looking for a flavor profile, and we've got the tools, the pieces, it's like a spice rack with the 3 varieties we use. We can use enough Riesling to keep it fresh and lively, just enough Gewürz to give it that aromatic lift. And like Ali said, with the Chardonnay, that kind of rounds out the texture. So we can really dial it into the exact flavor profile we're looking for, which is fun. It makes it easier to make the best wine that we can when we've got that kind of toolbox to play with.
Yeah, for me, Jacob, I'm going to sit there and say I always describe Twisted as yummy. I think Dave and Allison have really nailed it. I had the 18 we were just talking the 18 this morning, and I was just saying how beautiful the 18 was, and just absolutely loved it because it's the most recent release, and they're really nailing it, and I'm super happy with where they're landing on. So let me run through. I'll jump through a bunch of other questions that are there. And I saw somebody who is drinking the 15 Pinot. Yeah, another great vintage for the 15 was an awesome wine. No food, so Robin, no food suggestions pair with the samples. Funnily enough, you ask if we put them on labels. We actually don't put tasting notes or food pairings on labels because it's really up to the individual. Absolutely, they go with cheese and nuts, so that's great. But I always found, and just a quick funny story, I worked for a big wine company. The winery was down in Niagara on the Lake. The head office where I worked was in Mississauga, and I would be the one that have to write the back label copy. And it's a Merlot, hints of cedar, plum, and black cherry, helped me avoid the drive down in Niagara on the Lake. And Dave was the winemaker there too. So I don't know if I ever said that to you, Dave. But I swore we wouldn't do that at Flat Rock Cellars. So if you read our back label copy, we hopefully tell a story about the wine, about who we are, and gives you insights into who we are. So hopefully that answers a little bit of your question. Brian asked how the soil impacts the Pinot. A ton. We've got some soil that's where it's at the bottom where it flattens out. That's a lot of organic matter, because when it rains, all of the dead leaves and organic matter gets washed down, and it's a really black, loamy soil. And absolutely, the soil makes a huge difference. And the depth of soil. So the bottom of the vineyard is a very thin layer of soil. Our pond block is a deeper layer of soil that retains more moisture. We get really soft, plush wine from the pond block. We're down at the bottom. It's thin layer of soil. The water runs off. We get thinner berries, a little more tannins and stuff. So huge difference in soil. Fermentations, how many fermentations do they go through? They go through one. It's an alcoholic fermentation. What Dave talked about earlier is called malolactic fermentation. It's really not a fermentation. It's basically changing the bacteria in a wine, and it's changing the malic acid to lactic acid, and we call it malolactic fermentation. So that could be called two, but it's not technically scientifically a fermentation the way alcoholic fermentation is.
Just for the sake of time, I know we want to get through all the questions, but
thank you.
We'll definitely stay on at the end.
Thank you, time police.
Hey, that's what I'm here for.
Absolutely, it's all good.
We'll definitely stay on at the end, and we'll make sure we answer all the questions. And please, please ask them. Please stick around. And
we want to be respectful of everybody's time. We said we'd be here for an hour. We're here for as long as anybody wants to be here, but we want to get through the 6 wines in an hour. So thanks for keeping us on.
No worries.
So feel free to shoot us a question at the winery. You know, 3 days from now, if you think of something, we're always happy to answer your questions there too.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we were just tasting the 2020 Twisted, which is obviously not, like we said, it's not a finished wine yet. But the very first bottles of the 2018 Twisted, so our newest vintage that Ed was talking about, just left the building. They'll be hitting LCBO shelves maybe now, anytime. So keep your eye open for that new vintage. It's a new release that we're really excited about. And then swinging from Twisted into the next 2 wines, into Pink Twisted. Bring that one up next. Allison, do you want to tell us about the pink?
Sure, just look at it. That's all I have to say.
The color is crazy.
So the Pink Twisted is actually finally blended yesterday at the winery. So every single year, again, it's kind of like the White Twisted. We see what comes in. We have a goal in mind, and then we get the fruit, and we're so excited to start fermenting and making this blend, right? So someone asked earlier about co-fermentation. We actually ferment everything separately so that we can really manage the blend. We taste multiple different blends to get to this point. So we want to make sure we have, like, I'm not joking, we have like 30 different options, all little tiny vessels all over the winery, so that we have the exact blend we want to get to. So this blend came to us by way of Saignée de Gamay, and someone asked about Saignée, which means to bleed off in French. Basically, we had a red fermenter of Gamay grapes. Before it was done fermentation, we bled off a little bit of the juice, so it's not that deep, dark red. It's a rosé, basically. It's another style of making rosé. We blend that with a little bit of Riesling from our Young Vines Riesling up on the south top of the escarpment on our property, and a little bit of Gewürztraminer. And we're so excited by it. We're so proud of it. And this color, I mean, I can't stop looking at it.
Yeah, Dave, how do you settle on a color? How do you settle on you see those like super pale salmon-y colored wines, and then you see something gorgeous and vibrant and intense like this. How do you guys make that decision? And how do you get there?
Well, like Ali said, we've got so many options, and we do a lot of trials putting the blend together. And we're really our focus is dialing in on the flavor profile. So we narrow it down to, 3 or 4 out of 35 that we like in terms of flavor profile. But the color can vary in those depending on how we achieve that blend. So it's kind of a 2-stage process where we, the primary focus is making it taste great. That's number one. Mm-hmm. And, if our number one choice was a real, unappealing color, well, then we'd probably be looking for other options. But basically, we've got our prime choices we liked, sample 6 through 9 or whatever, for example. But of those that we really like the flavor the best, the color dialed in for us at number 8. So that's kind of the blend we go for. So it's kind of a 2-part thing. We want it to taste great, but we want it to look pretty too. So, it can change year over year because, vintages change, and we still want it to taste great. So that's obviously going to be the number one priority.
And I didn't say anything because I think this one's pretty self-explanatory, but this was another one of the wines we flip-flopped. So we're tasting jar number 6 at this point. Ed, Pink Twisted?
Besides loving it, this is always an interesting one for us. And I think one of the hardest challenges, and we talk a fair bit about it, is getting the right sweetness. We're not trying to make, call it a White Zinfandel, and I don't want to put down White Zinfandel, but when you think of Californian White Zinfandel, much sweeter, a much sweeter rosé. We're trying to find that right balance between an amazing, flavorful wine that has just enough sweetness that cuts that acidity and is super, super refreshing. And that's really what we're striving for. And so, I think we're landing on what 9 grams, I think. So it's basically a dry wine, but just with that little bit of residual sugar that makes it a beautiful, refreshing rosé, and love the way it's turned out.
And this Pink Twisted, I believe, will be the first 2020 of ours to hit the shelf. So I know they'll be bottling it in a few months, and it should hit shelves and be available to our club members first, and then to the general public probably June or July, just in time for the hot weather and the drinking season. So keep your eyes open for that. And I know that there's sitting outside in t-shirt drinking season.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I do know that there's a couple of cases, not much, I'm going to say less than 10 cases of the 2019 vintage left. If you guys can't wait, grab it while it's hot, while it's available. All right, on to the last wine, which is jar number 4, which is our estate Riesling. And Ed, you were talking about some sugar. You were talking about the freshness and the sugar and the Pink Twisted. How do Riesling and sugar work together for you? What are you looking for?
Acidity and sugar is a very interesting thing with wine. You can have a wine that has very low sugar and very low acidity that tastes sweeter than a wine that has a fair bit of sugar but very, very high acidity. So acidity really balances. And what is amazing about Ontario Rieslings, in particular, what I will say is bench Rieslings, is that lively, fresh acidity that we get that balances the residual sugar. So with our estate Riesling, we're always trying to make call it an off-dry wine. Nadja's Vineyard Riesling hence is always drier. We just like the way that style works with that particular part of the vineyard. But what I love about this wine is, most importantly, it has a little bit of residual sugar, but it has that freshness that cleanses the palate at the end, and that to me is what makes a great wine, is balance.
Yeah, it doesn't feel sweet, even though there's that 20 or so grams.
Yeah.
But Allison, when you're making the Riesling, how do you control this? How do you control the sweetness? How do you control the sugar? Are you dumping it in? Are you, I know the answer, but just.
Yeah, so I just want to address David Greer's question or comment about 4 needed more time than the others. David, you were very astute, because the other 5 wines you tasted today had been treated with sulfur to stop the ferment. This Riesling has not been sulfured yet, therefore it's not as settled out. There's a lot of built up stuff from fermentation still hanging out in that wine, so great eye. Secondly, in regards to sugar and Riesling, we are very blessed that grapes naturally are the highest gram per liter sugar fruit basically on the market. So there's tons and tons, like hundreds literally of grams of sugar to work with that we're going to ferment out to create alcohol. And we as winemakers are tasting, Ed, like you know we do. And we're watching these ferments as they go, getting drier and drier. And I couldn't be luckier than to have Dave, who has tasted probably thousands of Rieslings in his life, to be monitoring them with me, because I have my opinions, he has his opinions, he has his experience, and it's a team effort, and we catch them. We catch them where we want to catch them in terms of stopping the ferment naturally. So that means cooling it down to put the yeast to sleep, and then adding a little bit of after to basically let it all settle out. This one, Dave, just 21 on the dot, perfection. Like, after 40 years, you did it.
Mm-hmm.
Nailed it.
What is sulfur?
Exactly.
What is sulfuring when you say that?
SO2 is what we use. It's sort of the winemaking tool for basically inhibiting the yeast. When you want the yeast to cease its activity, we add SO2 to the wine, and that will inhibit the yeast. It doesn't actually kill it technically. It just arrests its activity. And if it's not eating and gobbling up sugar and fermenting, then it's going to die out on its own. So that's kind of how that works. It's also the natural preservative. It's the antioxidant factor in wines and foods. Like you find SO2 would be the common antioxidant in salad bars and jams and anything that's got the possibility to oxidize and ferment.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important topic. I don't know why I'm bouncing all over it, but anyways, so the SO2 is a really important one, right? Because everybody sees sulfites and they go, that's why I get headaches and all of this stuff. What's interesting about sulfites, they're in very, very small portions in wine. And there's actually more sulfites in a little piece of dried apricot than there is in a bottle of wine. And so if you are getting headaches from wine, it is either you're drinking too much, which is a common problem, but it also tends to be the tannins in wine. So those are histamines, right? So that tends to be what people are more sensitive to. There are some people in the population that are sensitive to sulfites, but it's very, very small percentage. It is more the histamines that are in wine. So I know sulfites sometimes get a bad rap. They are natural, they are considered organic. There's all of those things, and they get a bit of a bad rap, but it really allows us to make a better wine.
Just to put it in perspective, sulfites are measured in parts per million in wine, and a typical glass of white wine, say, might have 30 parts per million. An apricot, a dried apricot out of the bag, would have probably in the neighborhood of 400 parts per million. So that's just to give you an idea.
Yeah. Now, I do just want to acknowledge that it's 7:03. We're almost there, and I appreciate everyone sticking around. If anyone has to go, thank you so much for joining us. But if you guys want to keep sticking with us, we've got a little more awesome content left, so we're going to keep rolling. One thing that I wanted to touch on with the Riesling in particular is whenever being in the industry, I have friends and they're always asking me like, hey, I want to lay some wines down, but I don't want to spend a fortune. What should I buy? I always say Riesling. You can get our Riesling is $17.95, and we taste our Rieslings from 2003, the first vintage ever, and they're freaking incredible. They're so good. What are we looking for? Like when you taste a 2020 or when you taste any Riesling, Ed, what are you looking for in a wine to show that it's going to age?
So to me, intensity of flavor, right? If it's going to taste watery already, it's going to be watery in 20 years, right? So intensity of flavor is super important. And then structure. So when it comes to white wine, structure is typically driven through acidity, most importantly, but also sweetness adds to the ability for a wine to age. So I think those are the three things that you're most looking for when you're looking for wines that will age. And one of the things, just to give everybody an insight to Flat Rock Cellars, we, on occasion, we've worked on building a cellar. We've got basically every wine going back to 2003, and we go in and once in a while, I'll pull something out, and the lineup of staff trying to get access to those older vintages is everybody wants it, and it's great to be able to share those older vintages. The staff go crazy because, like Jacob said, we can go back to 2003, 2004 wines and pull them out, and they still have 10, 15 years of life in them. And so think about that. Think about a Riesling we released it at, I want to say, $16.95 back in 2004, would have been the 03. And if you open that up right now, it still has 10, 15 years of life. It's truly amazing what the vineyard is.
Dave, Allison, anything to add to that?
Well, you know what? I'm going to take a point that I know Ed has mentioned several times, and I'm going to mention it now again because he's right on the mark when he says it. And that is, I think what sets this region in good standing in terms of a world-class region for producing wine is that ability of our wines to age. Because any of the world's best-known regions all have wines that have the ability to age. And Niagara is right there with that. My eyes were opened years ago when I was working at Inniskillen, and we had kind of a joint thing going on in California in the Napa Valley. So I was on the phone very often with the winemaker down there, and it really opened my eyes to have conversations in which that winemaker was envious of our conditions here. Because at that time I was, new to the business, and I thought, oh, California is, it's God's country for making wine. It's got to be so easy there. And in those discussions, he was genuinely jealous of the natural acidity that we had and the ability of our wines to age. And I thought, wow, that was a real eye opener for me.
So if you're ever looking to build yourself a cellar, Riesling is the way to get it started. And I'm going to post a poll really quick. I'll just leave it up for 30 seconds. And while people are answering, I want to get it from you guys. What's the oldest Riesling you've ever tasted, Ed? Not necessarily from Flat Rock, but
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I probably go back. I'm probably 20 years. I would probably sit there and say, it's starting to get to the Flat Rock wines that I'm ranking are some of the oldest now. Look, our wines age unbelievable. We had a wine writer from the U.S. who wrote a book on Riesling, and he was flying from Alsace and he lives out in Washington, and he came to Flat Rock Cellars on his way back from spending a week or two in Alsace researching on this book on Riesling. And I remember we went through Nadja's Vineyard. It was actually a book on dry Riesling, and it was on Nadja's Vineyard. And it was probably 2012. And he goes, I was just in Alsace tasting 2010, 2011 wines, and they are not as fresh as we were probably tasting our 03, 04, 05 Nadja's Vineyards. And he was just blown away that our wines, 5 years older would be fresher than the wines that he just had in Alsace. And that just really speaks to the ageability of our wines. Exciting.
Dave, Allison, just quick, what's your oldest Rieslings?
Well, when I was working in Germany, making Rieslings, my boss, Fritz, pulled out a bottle that his grandfather made. Now, Fritz is the late Fritz Bastian. So I can't even guess when his grandfather would have been alive, but this wine, actually I brought out two of them. It was a 1922 Riesling and a 1926 Riesling.
Nice.
That was in 1980 that I tasted those. And they were, definitely aged character, but they were not shot. They were not gone. They were not done. They were enjoyable. And that blew my mind and made me want to make Riesling.
Allison, can you beat that?
No. A couple of years ago when I was in wine school, there was a sale on a really cool Riesling in the LCBO. It was I can't remember the name now, but it was a German Riesling. It was 1991 was the vintage. So us wine students were oh, this is so cool, an old wine. So we went out and bought a bunch for $20 a bottle. And it was actually really good. And we still, I still probably have a bottle downstairs that I'm sitting on, but 1991 would have been mine.
Well, I still have work boots I bought in 1991.
You guys can see this. You guys can see the screen here. We have one lucky soul who's tasted a 30+ year wine, but most people have had a chance to taste something with a little bit of age on it, which is great.
Yeah, so let me jump to some of the questions. So Amy asked, does aging wine always make it taste better? The answer is Not necessarily, right? Certain wines do taste better, obviously, with age. I think we drink some of our wines too young because we're getting them out relatively quickly. Wines, in general, would say if you're getting something that's young, it's better a year or two in bottle. But it really depends on the wine. It depends on the region in terms of what happens. So, I always say if you're trying to figure out if you like aged wines, buy a case of a wine you like and just taste it every 6 months. And when you get, and see what happens over the course of it, and you'll learn exactly how wines age and if you like those characteristics or not. And again, it's a preferential thing. French in general like younger wines, and the English like their Bordeaux, their clarets older. And that's, I'll say it's cultural, but that's the way. So not necessarily yes or no. I assume the percentages change slightly every year. Absolutely, Mark. I'm assuming that's for Twisted, but yes, they do. Are we going to have a Gewurz at some time? Oh my Lord! And I really shouldn't give this stuff away. Jacob probably cringes as I give the inside scoop on this stuff.
You make my marketing plan easy.
Yeah, Allison, we were tasting the wines. Last week, Allison and Dave were showing me the wines, and I'm not a fan in general of doing like these little really, really tiny ones, right? And then they poured me this Gewürztraminer from our little block out front, and oh my God, is it good. And I want to say there's one barrel, so there's going to be 20 or 25 cases of a absolutely knock your socks off, unbelievable Gewürztraminer, and I am hard on Gewürz. That's how good it is. Unbelievable. But like I said, it's one barrel, and yeah. Martin asked, is Twisted a field blend or fermented separately? It's fermented separately, then blended. Am I right, Dave and Allison? I believe so.
Yep.
Who came up with Twisted? Can you tell me about the history? So we had Riesling, Gewürz, and Chardonnay in 2004 coming out of the vineyard. And, we were playing around. Like innovation to me is at the core of some of the things we do at Flat Rock Cellars. So always trying to learn, do, try. Just because nobody's ever done it doesn't mean we can't experiment and see if we can do it. So we put these three wines together and it was like, oh my God, this tastes really great. I can drink lots of this. And then my wife's responsible for the name. We were playing around, 3 vines, Twisted vines. And she was like, just call it Twisted. Just leave it at Twisted. And so that's how Twisted came about. The new Rusty Shed. We haven't decided on the barrels, but maybe Allison, you want to talk about what you envision for the Rusty Shed coming out of this year? I know somebody's drinking one because I saw it in the chat. So
funny. So again, it's so hard to tell at this stage in the game because they are not, they're not ready yet. And you tasted them out of a barrel, and Dave and I taste them out of a barrel, and we love where they are going for sure. But also something that we do at Flat Rock because we're so Chard, Pinot, Riesling focused. Well, Chard and Pinot ripen at the same time. So a lot of fruit has to come off our property in a real short period of time. So we start harvesting for sparkling. It's a nice slow, initiation into harvest. And then, get a couple more grapes off the vine of Chardonnay, and then bam, Pinots come today. It takes total precedent. It all comes in one big 10-day blur. And then we harvest the rest of the Chardonnay, which is still hanging beautifully. But what we get there is just a total different style on the same property, right? So we've got these beautiful higher acid, leaner styles, but with nice little touch of oak. And then we've got these, big, luscious, juicier styles. So the Rusty is going to be a blend of those things. And again, we just get things to play with down there in those barrels. So I'm really excited for the 2020 Rusty for sure.
Great, thanks, Allison. Yeah, I love the way we get those two different styles all in the same year, which is amazing. Chris Waters on Facebook. So we got a Facebook question. How much does a commercial ideal for sweetness versus your own taste for what is balanced play a role for the larger volume Riesling? I'm going to say, in general, we try not to think about it from a commercial perspective. We try and think about it from a wine perspective, but maybe I'll let Dave, you answer that question for Chris. Like, we're not formulaic in that Riesling, right?
Yeah, no, you're right on the mark. Allison and I, our strategy when we do the the trials and when we're tasting as things are fermenting, we're really looking for the balance. We want it to taste the way we want it to taste. And, we'll stop the fermentation at that point, and we will see where the numbers lie. And that's why there's such variation. But it's really all about the flavor profile. I think it's a bad road to go down to be chasing numbers, because numbers can kind of support what's going on in the wine, but they don't dictate necessarily the flavor. You've got to hit the flavor profile you want, and then see where the numbers lie. So it's a different way of coming about it, but I think chasing the number, say 50 grams per liter is the most popular wine at the LCBO. I don't think that's the route to go, because that may not be a balanced wine for us.
Okay.
All right. Allison, did you want to add anything to Chris's response? Or again, just for the sake, I know we'll get through all these questions, but I just want to, say our thank yous and give a little bit of info.
Absolutely, Jacob. If anybody wants to jump off by all means. We're going to be here answering all the questions, so love to keep answering questions. We'll be here as long as people want us here. Thank you, everybody. If you're still on and you want to jump off, we really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you at the winery when we're allowed, and hope everybody is staying safe. Thanks for joining us, for those that want to jump off. And let's keep going through. Would we acidify the rosé a little? I guess somebody feels there needs to be a little bit more acidity in there. Dave, what do you think?
Sorry, Ed, hold on one sec. Just before we dig into more questions, for anyone that's leaving, I just want to, I know our retail manager Marley would kill me if I didn't send you off with the fact that we ship our wines all across Canada. So no matter where you're listening, or if you want to send a bottle to, a family member, you can order online and ship it. We are in the LCBO, we're in grocery stores. We'll be releasing our Good Karma Chardonnay. I saw some Good Karma love in the chat box. That comes out February 6th, so in 2 weeks, week and a bit. And a percentage of the proceeds of every single bottle that we sell of that goes to Feed Ontario. So if you're looking to try a Chardonnay, if you haven't had it before, that would be great, because it's always good to give back, but especially during these times. And then just as a little shout out, a kind of kudos to people who are listening, our estate Chardonnay on Sunday will be going $2 off. So we're telling you ahead of time that you'll be able to give that a try for $17.95 at the LCBO and at the winery. And finally, if you don't have anything planned for Valentine's Day yet, Marley's put together something absolutely fantastic. I'll be participating. It's a virtual paint night. So you can do all of this with an expert, and we will send you the paint, we'll send you the canvas, we'll send you the brushes. Of course, we'll send you some wine, and you can find all of those things on our website as well. It's going to be super fun. And I think that
I'll be there.
And Allison will be painting. And I think that that would get me out of the doghouse from Marley. So from now, Ed, you can take it away with the questions. And thank you, everyone, if you do decide to sign off.
Yeah, and a big shout out to Marley. She's the one that connects everybody up in retail. She's putting together these amazing initiatives, whether it's tonight, whether it's the paint night. And I know she's sitting there listening, but a huge shout out. She's doing an awesome job, and thanks for making our lives fun and our customers' lives fun, Marley. So great job. Quickly, acidify the rosé a little, Dave. What's your thoughts?
We have the means to do that if we choose to. We don't want to do anything too prematurely. Like I say, these are baby wines. They're not filtered and everything yet. So when we get it a little further down the line, if we think we need to tweak something up or down, we can do that. So at the moment, I'm not going to say yes, we are, because we'll have to see. That decision's coming later.
Yeah, to me, it reminds me of a funny story. In 2006, I had an Australian guy come up for harvest, and he shows up and he's like, "Where are the bags of acidity?" I'm like, "What are you talking about, the bags of acidity?" "No, where's the bags of acidity that we put into the wine?" I'm like, you're in Ontario, buddy. We're all natural here. We don't need to add the acidity, right? So Australia, warm, the acidity falls out, and they need to add acidity. So it was just a funny conversation. Christine asked how to decide the percentages of the different grapes to put in. Allison, so I guess for Twisted, we've got a bit of a background on what we are aiming for, so it's relatively consistent year to year. But when you drill down to it, how do you decide how much Riesling, how much Sheppard, how much Gewurz goes into that Twisted?
Yeah, so we have beers in the past to taste from. We have a loose plan as we go into harvest, because we can't make wine from grapes we don't have. So we know what we kind of are shooting for going into harvest. We get those grapes in the building, and we're tasting all the way through, planning, organizing the ferments. And then as we go to blend, we mock up these trials to see what plays well together. And like you've said, Ed, Twist has been around a long time. We have a great, framework to work with. So the percentages will change year to year, 5 to 10% from every varietal. But the goal is to have it Riesling dominant, to give that beautiful freshness, that strong acidity, a little bit of Gewurz, because Gewurz is a very overpowering, very aromatic, very big, showy grape. So you don't want to have that, stealing the show. And then the Chardonnay, again, like we said, was just there to round out the mid palate and really give the wine some structure.
Great. Peter asked the main difference between Riesling and Nadjas. The biggest difference is different parts of the vineyard. One is up at the top, a little cooler, hard dolomitic limestone. The other, middle of the vineyard, a little bit warmer, a little bit deeper soil, softer yellow limestone. So place is important. But we also we get different fruit flavors. And so we do Nadjas in a drier style, and the estate tends to be a little bit more residual sugar. And that's what makes up the difference between those two wines. And their vineyards are probably 300-400 meters apart. Or the blocks. Do our old Rieslings have petrol notes? I'm going to say what I love about that is petrol is a very Germanic way to describe German Rieslings, where it gets that really diesely, oily characteristic. What I love about Niagara Rieslings and bench Rieslings in particular is we don't get that sort of diesel smell. We get a much more lanolin, paraffin wax, paraffin oil characteristic that I find much more pleasant. So it's still an oily characteristic to our Riesling, but different. And maybe Dave, you want to jump in on that, because I know obviously you've been making Riesling in in Germany and here, and maybe you want to talk about that.
Yeah, actually, I would agree with you wholeheartedly. I think we do, like for me, I get that waxy character. I get flintiness off it, but not that sort of pungent diesel, which I also agree is a good thing. Yeah.
Okay. Neil asked, high in limestone. Absolutely, we're high in limestone just because we're sitting right on the bench, which is great. The slight effervescence you're getting in Twisted tonight and any of the wines is the CO2 that's preserving the wine. So that's just natural part. We want that in the wines right now. It's a natural preservative. So you'll see that. Everybody remember, these wines are unfinished. They still have a ways to go. We're a bit naked right now and showing the inner workings of Flat Rock Cellars before the wines are finished. So don't take these as purely finished wines. There's still things to be done, but we want to give you an insight as to what we see as we work towards making amazing wines. If we were to do a taste test, what wine would you suggest? So I'm assuming that's for the taste test of see how wines age. Any of them will work. Riesling is to me, I think, a great one because it has, I love the way Riesling ages, but Chard will work and Pinot will work absolutely. They all age differently. And they all age to different flavors that you may like or you may not like, right? Pinot gets super early or it's super earthy. Chardonnay tends to caramelize a little bit, and Riesling gets that petrol-y, waxy kind of characteristics. They're all different, which is great. Doug, you want to order your Gewürz? Yes, because it is so good. So call Marley tomorrow, have her book a case off for you, because that is absolutely awesome. Mark, does the bottle shape make any difference to the wine? No. It does not make any difference to the quality of the wine. The bottle really only indicates where it's from. Like historically, Alsace was in the Hock bottle, Burgundy in the Burgundy bottle, Bordeaux in the Bordeaux bottle. It's more about place than it is about quality. If I put a Riesling in a Bordeaux bottle, it's going to taste the same. I believe that's correct, Allison. Dave, no difference, right?
Yeah, no, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Bruce, anytime, we'd love to have you back. That would be great. Shelley's Flat Rock planning another ice wine soon. That's an interesting one. We've done it before. Dave and I both worked at Inniskillen, so the heart of ice wine. We did it. I did it more because I'm in Niagara. We have to do ice wine because it's what Niagara does. I have pulled away from it. I am passionate about the wines we do. I'm not that I'm not passionate about ice wine, but it's not what drives me. And so for me, we've stepped away from it more because it's not something I'm wildly passionate about. I'm wildly passionate about Chard, Pinot, Riesling. So that's probably why we haven't done it. Will we do it in the future? I will say maybe, but we don't necessarily have any plans right now. Although I love the style of ice wine we did. We did a very, I'll call it a dry ice wine. So we would ferment it as much as we could to get to a higher alcohol and right sugar. So it was more of a, it was still sweet, 35 bricks, 35 whatever, but it was a drier style of ice wine. So I liked our style, so we did that unique. Great that you enjoyed it. Joe, do we ship to the US? Unfortunately, right now, no. And I know, I don't know if I saw a Rochester comment. We miss our American friends. We can open the border. I shouldn't make political comments, so I'll stop before I get myself.
Yeah, that's where I have to step in.
Yeah, no, I'll stop before yeah, look, we're looking forward to the border being open and welcoming our American friends back. So absolutely. How long does a wine continue to age once bottled? Well, it continues to age until you open it up and drink it. It just, at some point, it does not get better, right? So it ages past the point of you actually wanting to drink it, but it will always change. It's a living product that will always evolve over time. At some point, it's evolving in very, very not nice tasting ways after a certain point. Earthiness of Pinot Noir. That's a great question. I feel I'm going to totally get out of answering this question. I'm going to throw it over to Dave and Allison because I agree Pinot is earthy, but I have no idea how it gets there. So how about you try that one?
I'm going to say Pinot is one of those varieties that is very much tied to its place. So not all Pinots are earthy. It depends where they are. It depends how they're grown. It depends on the crop load on those vines. Like there's a lot of variables with Pinot Noir. Burgundian Pinot Noirs are typically have those earthy notes. Other places where conditions are a little different, I think like in places like Oregon, for example, or Northern California, cooler places where in the warm climates, cooler sections of the warmer places, where there's a lot of irrigated vineyards, you tend not to get so much earthy notes there. So I think it's hard to pinpoint it down to one thing, but I think it's very much tied to the place, because even in Niagara, there are Pinot vineyards that don't produce much in the way of earthy tones and others that do. So it's probably, a lot of factors there, but I think soil and microclimate are two of the bigger factors there.
Dave, you bailed on answering the question as much as I did. So there was somebody that's asking just about put away for aging. 15 gravity is awesome, but all the wines that you've got there, 11 is drinking really, really well now. But 15 gravity is one that I know will age. And I love that 15 gravity. It's a absolutely awesome wine. Got an amazing score from Wine Spectator. It's a killer wine. So Peter asked cork versus screw top. Right up my alley, Peter.
In 2 minutes or less.
All right. So screw cap. Think of it just simply, 500 years ago, it was an oil-soaked rag that went into a bottle to preserve the bottle. Then they found cork. So cork technology is 500 years old. Screw cap technology is about 30 years old, and it's designed to preserve the wine perfectly. You can store it straight up and down. You don't have to lay it on its side. It is the best way. The wines still age. Corks don't breathe. It's a myth. Screw cap guarantees the wine we make is the wine you're going to drink. And if I just put it in a story, if I invented wine today and I went to some people and said, hey, how can I close? I'm going to put this wine in a bottle. How can I close it? And they would say to me, okay, well, here's the cork. But the problem is with cork, 10% of the time it's going to have cork taint. It's going to oxidize prematurely. You're going to need this special utensil that you're going to have to buy separately to open it up, right? But it'll make a nice popping sound when you open it. Or you can have the screw cap, which allows you to store it straight up and down. You just crack it open. It preserves the wine perfectly. You're not going to go bad. Which one are you going to choose? Everybody would choose the screw cap. So it really is the best technology. I'm all about, we talked about our mantra today on a call. Our mantra at Flat Rock Cellars is make the best wine, and quality is first and foremost. And screw cap is the best closure for wine. If there's a better one, we'd go to it, but really it is the best technology. So hands down, that's why we do it. Minute 59, Jacob.
All right.
You guys make a lot of wine, but still feel. We actually make a really so work at Flat Rock Cellars probably full time. We're 6 or 7. I guess we're probably 6 or 7 full-time people at Flat Rock Cellars.
And we don't make that much wine. I wish we made more because we keep not having enough.
We're actually, in the grand scheme of wineries, we're actually quite small, which is great. For us, this is craftsmanship. This is artisan, and it's our goal. I've got 7, 8 people who are crazy passionate about wine. And like I said earlier in today's call, it's not about making or selling, it's about sharing our passion. So that's really what we do. Wine membership, it's awesome because you get insights into special wines. It's quarterly, wines that other people can't get, access to wines first, better pricing on wines, events at the winery, really cool stuff that we do. We try and make it fun, enjoyable, and all that, and everything. 12 bottles every quarter, and it's just a great way to stay in touch and really learn about wine. Jacob, anything else you want to say on that?
No, just that if you are interested, you can always shoot any of us an email, and there's lots of information on the website. We love everyone, but we love our members, and we'd love to have you.
Yeah, it's really a fun way to enjoy Flat Rock Cellars. And then Anne and David, we're gonna hopefully do more of these.
I think there's a Chardonnay one at the end of February.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
I think the date's February 25th, and it'll be all about Chardonnay. More details to come.
Yeah, so we are doing more. I'm not sure we'll send out a synopsis of the questions and answers.
This whole thing has been recorded, so you'll be able to see. You can scroll through this last, holy moly, 35 minutes past 7 o'clock. You can rewatch any of it on our YouTube channel. I think we'll have it up on Instagram. We'll have it on Facebook. So yes, there's lots of access to it.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we made it. And 43 of you stuck with us all the way to 7:35.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah.
if anybody has any other questions, we're available at the winery to answer them. So if you're not doing it today, but we're definitely going to do more of these, and look forward to seeing everybody again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night. Then we'll see you soon, virtually or in person when we can.
Cheers.
All right. Good night.
Thanks, guys. Cheers. Good job, team.